Is every deal in your pipeline getting the same treatment? If so, you might be losing money. Not in an obvious way either. It usually shows up as slow deals, inconsistent pricing, or discounts that no one really meant to approve. For example, a rep is working on a straightforward deal, nothing customer risky. It's a quote that'll take a few minutes to put together and send. Except they're double checking pricing, waiting on approvals, maybe even asking somebody on Slack if it looks right. By the time it goes out, the deal has already slowed down. At the same time, somebody else who's working a more complex deal with custom pricing, multiple products, maybe a special discount to get it over the line, is going through the exact same process, which means a lot of the important decisions are still sitting with the rep. Pricing is getting adjusted manually, discounts get applied based on judgment calls. Approvals might happen, but they're not always tied to clear rules. So you're going to end up with slow, simple deals and risky, complex ones. This is one of those problems that doesn't really feel like a problem at first. Most teams build a quoting process that works and they standardize it. So they're using the same steps, the same approvals, same structure for every single deal. It feels clean and controlled. Good, right? But quoting isn't one type of workflow. And when everything gets forced into the same path, things are going to start to break in ways that are easy to miss. Most teams don't set it up this way on purpose. They're trying to create consistency. They want one way to build and send quotes so everybody follows the same process. The problem is that consistency at the process level doesn't always translate to control at the deal level. Not every deal is carrying the same risk. Not every deal needs the same level of oversight, but the system they're using treats it like they do. So if you step back and look at your pipeline, most quotes fall into actually a few different categories. One, there's the simple ones, repeat customers, standard pricing, nothing unusual. These should move pretty quickly. There's no real reason to slow them down. Two, you've got deals that are a little more involved. Maybe there's some discounting or a bundle or a few variables that need to be accounted for. These don't need heavy process, but they do need some guardrails. And three, now there's the complex deals, the ones where pricing isn't straightforward or where the structure of the quote really matters. That's where mistakes can get really expensive and where you actually want tighter control. The issue is that most systems don't recognize these differences. Everything gets treated the same, so you don't get speed where you should and you don't get control where you need it. So over time, this starts to show up in a few ways. Deals take longer than they should, especially the easy ones. Again, let these people give them your money. Reps end up spending more time building quotes than selling, and then buyers are feeling that delay. On the other end, pricing starts to drift. Discounts aren't always consistent. Some deals get approved that probably shouldn't have been, and others get slowed down for no real reason. And then there's the part that teams don't track closely. Margins. When pricing lives partly in the system and partly in somebody's head or a spreadsheet or your downloads folder, it's hard to enforce any real consistency. Small decisions get made on individual deals that don't seem like a big deal in the moment, but they add up. So what does a better setup look like? The alternative is not making a better process. It's actually just making that process more flexible. So instead of forcing every single deal through the same path, the quoting system needs to adjust based on what's actually happening in the deal. Simple quotes should move through with very little friction. If pricing is standard and within expected ranges, there's no reason to slow things down. As deals get more complex, that's where rules start to matter more. Discount thresholds, validation checks, basic approvals when something falls outside the norm. And for the highest complexity deals, the system should enforce structure, clear approval steps, visibility into pricing and margins, and less reliance on manual decisions. The key is that your system does the work, not your rep. This is usually where teams hit a wall because a lot of quoting tools are built for simple use cases. They work fine until pricing starts to get more complex or the sales process gets more structured. So the teams start filling the gaps themselves. They keep pricing logic in spreadsheets. They handle approvals over Slack or email. They rely on people to catch issues before a quote goes out. It works for a while, but it ends up creating more steps and more room for error. So this is actually something we see a lot with teams using HubSpot. It handles basic quoting really well, but once you start layering in pricing rules, bundles, or approval logic, it gets really hard to manage inside the system. So that's where Quotivity comes in. The idea is to keep the quoting process inside HubSpot, but add the structure behind the scenes so that the system can handle those differences between deals. Faster for the simple ones, more controlled for the complex ones, without asking reps to figure it out on their own. If your quoting process treats every single quote the same, it's worth taking a closer look at what that's actually costing you. Because the impact usually isn't obvious at first. It shows up over time in slower deals, inconsistent pricing, and margins that are harder to explain. And by then, that's a lot harder to unwind.